deliberate warning to others that there was no alternative to immediate submission. The city was stripped of its treasures and a tribute extracted from the wealthy families. Then most of the women and children were herded off to Mongolia. The city walls were then systematically destroyed, and refugees were dispatched to spread the news that Bukhara had fallen. Genghis Khan was a knowing exponent of psychological warfare. A large contingent of the male population was then herded out in front of his army, and with this human shield, Genghis marched on Samarkand. From behind these very walls, the citizens of Samarkand watched for the dust cloud of the approaching Mongols. The Kharazm Shah had already abandoned them. He had fled westward a few days earlier. The Mongols put to the torch that part of the city which lay outside the walls, and Samarkand surrendered within 5 days. Within just a few months, the Mongols had smashed one of the largest empires in the world. But there was still a personal score to settle. To seek out the Kharazm Shah, one of Genghis Khan's finest generals, Subadai, was dispatched to the west. Genghis himself turned south toward Afghanistan in pursuit of the Sultan's son and the remnants of the empire's army. To the Mongols, this was a strange and alien land. They knew of it only from stories told by nomadic wanderers like these, who had journeyed between China and Afghanistan for centuries. A 1,000 years before Christ, Zarathustra had preached to his followers here. 700 years later, Alexander marched his army through these hills. Now came Genghis Khan. The cities of these parts were some of the oldest known to man, and among the wealthiest. Places like Merv, Naishapur, Tus, Herat, Balkh. Genghis Khan and his army had only once before seen cities like these, and that was thousands of miles away in China. From Samarkand all the way to the Indus River, almost everything they came across was a revelation. To a people who traveled only with what they could carry on their horses and who lived in felt tents, it was bewildering. Genghis Khan determined that in future his people would live their lives as richly endowed as these people. Glassware, silks, pottery, carpets, tapestries, gold, silverware. These were the trappings of cities that had for centuries set their inhabitants apart from the nomads. These things would now adorn the inside of Mongol tents. They were loaded up and taken back across the steppes in massive caravans. More importantly, the Mongols also sent back to their homeland all of the artisan families who produced these works. Alongside them marched clerics, physicians, mystics, and poets. From the great city of Gurganch, chroniclers claimed, 100,000 artisans were deported. The story was repeated everywhere. It was one of the greatest enforced migrations in history. The tools, raw materials, and all the skills of the great cities were transplanted to the empty grasslands of Central Asia. This was more than just plunder. Genghis was setting down the foundations of an empire. The most highly prized of the city dwellers were the metal workers and engineers. These were the people who would build and update the Mongol war machinery. They would forge scimitars, design and manufacture catapults and ballistas and all the other siege machines the Mongols would deploy in future campaigns. Suddenly, a people who had known little more than herding and hunting now had in their employ some of the finest tool makers, metal workers and artisans in the world. But Genghis Khan had not embarked on this campaign simply to enrich his domain. His first purpose was still punitive revenge. When he rode past these Buddhas at Barmiyan, in the heart of Afghanistan, he was still in pursuit of the Kharazm Shah's son. When one of his own grandsons was killed here, he ordered the slaughter of the entire population. The terror that this unleashed had no precedent. Just as in China, those who suffered most were the peasants who worked the land. To a people who had never grown anything themselves, the connection between fertility and prosperity was something they just didn't understand. Peasants were worthless. Thousands were slaughtered. And so, terrible disaster swept the land. This part of the world has very few rivers, and the traditional form of irrigation is the kanat, an underground tunnel which brings water from the mountain foothills out onto the plain. The tunnel protects the precious water from evaporation and from blowing sand. But, like most irrigation systems, kanats need to be cleared of choking sediment. Where the peasants had been slaughtered or chased away, the kanat system collapsed, and the land turned into a desert. A Persian chronicler described the catastrophe.
If for 1,000 years to come no more evil befalls the country, yet it will still not be possible to repair the damage.
The cities suffered almost as badly. These are the foundations of a citadel built by Alexander the Great at Herat in western Afghanistan. After the Mongols had stormed the new citadel above, parts of which had been recently restored, they butchered almost the entire population. News of this and other massacres spread like shockwaves to other cities as a warning that anything but complete submission would cost them dearly. Psychological warfare, and it worked. From then on, for every city that was wiped out, many others surrendered and were left unharmed. But nevertheless, the roll call of devastation was numbing. Persian chroniclers claimed nearly 2.5 million died here at Herat. At Naishapur, the chroniclers put the figure at 2 million. None of these figures can be taken literally, but they do indicate the enormous impact the Mongol invasion had on this corner of the Islamic world. The cold and deliberate slaughter of entire populations had no precedent in history. At Balkh, once a jewel of mosques and universities, nothing remains but the walls. Here at Tus, in Iran, even the walls have crumbled. Eventually, Genghis grew tired of the campaign, and at the shores of the Indus River, turned his army around and headed home. He was 55, and aware of his own mortality.